Recording by saying good morning, good afternoon. Oh my gosh, I just practiced. It's not morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Julia Wallers. I'm the Assistant Director of Transportation here at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, MAPC. And I'm so glad you've joined us for our webinar this afternoon to discuss our recently released toolkit on e-cargo bikes, electric cargo bikes, strategies for municipal delivery transition. This was a new resource that we developed here at MAPC in partnership with the City of Boston with funding from the Mass Clean Energy Center and MassCEC. And we're lucky to be joined by Elijah Sinclair from MassCEC, as well as our project manager, Mara Holland, to talk about the toolkit, and Harper Mills from the City of Boston, as well as Chris Moram of Net Zero Boston. So before we get into our content today and talk about what's to be expected, we can just advance the slide and do a little bit of housekeeping. As you've seen so far, this meeting is being recorded for public record. You will find the recording posted on our website, MAPC, within the week. The slides will also be emailed out to you. If you don't want to be recorded, you can turn off your camera or leave the webinar. We totally understand. Everything shared verbally and in the chat will be recorded. So to that end, we do have the chat function open to you. We suggest any questions that you have for speakers to be entered into the Q&A box, which is also open, and we can see that on the back end, and we'll be sure to get to those questions in either the panel discussion or the Q&A section of this program. Please just share the chat for any immediate issues you're having with access or volume, and we'll be sure to respond as timely as possible. Next slide. So just a little background of what we'll be covering today. If you're anything like me or most people in this region, you've looked around and noticed over the last decade, half decade, there are a lot of delivery vehicles on our streets, and they take up a lot of space. They spew a lot of emissions, and they're maybe not the most efficient or equitable or clean way of keeping up with the increased e-commerce market and delivery of food and goods and you name it. So you wonder, could there be another way? Is there a better way to do this? And that's really where e-cargo bikes have come in. Like I said, this is a new resource. We'll give you a little background about how this came about, who the key players have been in making this happen. We'll talk about the Boston Delivers program, which actually demonstrated how this might work in a micro region of the city if we were to shift from typical trucks, vans, larger vehicles to an e-cargo bike. How would that look? What are the logistics? What are the challenges? What are the funding mechanisms, staffing, operations? It's a great idea, but in application, there's lots to be considered. So we're excited to cover that in detail, as well as the overview of this e-cargo bike delivery resource that MAPC then released in partnership with the City of Boston just a couple of months ago. So this webinar is not as much an opportunity for us to walk you through that toolkit, which is available online. You'll see it in the chat, but to give an opportunity to have discussion, to ask questions directly of the practitioners who have been involved in moving this idea forward from vision to application, and maybe address some of your concerns or questions about trying something like this in your own municipality, which may or may not look like what Boston did. Next slide. So just a little rundown of sort of the roadmap of how we've gotten to the idea of this project to the release of this toolkit really started from having the Mass Clean Energy Center, MassCEC, to provide some funding to actually make it happen. The City of Boston then demonstrating it through a pilot of an e-cargo bike delivery program called Boston Delivers, which was done in partnership with Net Zero Logistics to actually operate the program. And then MAPC came in to develop this toolkit to really operationalize a step-by-step roadmap of how you might expand e-cargo bikes for deliveries across the region, because that's really what we do as the regional planning agency, who serves 101 cities and towns across the Boston region. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to our first speaker, Elijah Sinclair from MassCEC. He's their program manager on their transportation team, and he oversees several transportation programs, including the statewide e-bike voucher program and a number of e-bike pilot programs across the state. Elijah, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Julia. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming out to learn about this program and the toolkit which MAPC put together. We're really excited about all this work. So like Julia mentioned, my name's Elijah. I'm a program manager at MassCEC. And in case you're not familiar with MassCEC, we're a state economic development agency focused on building our state's clean energy economy. And I specifically sit on our clean transportation team. And the broad goal of the clean transportation team is to figure out how we can scale clean transportation to meet our ambitious climate goals in Massachusetts. And one of the ways that we've been doing this is through our Act for All programming. So Act for All, accelerating clean transportation for all. The mission is to pilot equity-focused clean transportation projects that increase clean transportation access and decrease existing transportation burdens. And we're largely focused on overburdened populations and environmental justice communities and similar groups across the state. And in the first round of Act for All, we have mostly deployed around $5 million of funding for 10 different projects addressing topic areas including e-bike incentives, EV consumer education, ride-for-hire electrification, and e-cargo bike delivery like this project. And I'll just mention that with this Act for All funding, we're really figuring out what are the pathways to scale these technologies. And for example, with the e-bike incentives, we ran 4 e-bike incentive programs. Those were a great success, and we were able to scale that into a statewide program. And we've learned a lot from this program we're going to talk about today, and we're starting to think about what next steps might look like. And we're excited to have this panel here to start talking about that with all of you. Can you hear me okay? Okay. And with that, maybe I'll hand it over to, I believe, Mara or Julia for the next slide.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mara Holland. I'm on the transportation team at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. And just a quick overview of electric cargo bikes. They really provide some substantial benefits from a delivery perspective, including congestion relief, decreasing trucks on our roadways, decreasing emissions, much easier to park in certain areas in front of businesses and decrease the need for truck parking, increasing air quality in the area, especially in concentrated areas where there's a lot of truck traffic and emissions, increasing street safety. We know that trucks play a really big role in street challenges related to safety in the region. And so if we can decrease trucks and replace them with electric cargo bikes, smaller vehicles, we can increase safety in all of our streets. And it also increases job access as more delivery workers can be hired to help do deliveries. And they reduce a barrier for delivery workers as there isn't a need for a license, especially a CDL or a specific license in order to do deliveries on an electric cargo bike. I'll also note that there really is no standard currently now for what an electric cargo bike looks like, what its power is, how many wheels it has, what its weight is. So they really have a wide variety of looks and abilities to carry things and move things and function in our area. And so these are just a couple different ones that were used in the Boston pilot here for different types of deliveries. And now I will hand it off to Harper to talk a little bit more about the delivery program that was piloted in Boston.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, so my name's Harper Mills. I am a planner with the new mobility team within the City of Boston Streets Cabinet. And I was the program manager for the Boston Delivers pilot program. This pilot program sort of launched a planning phase around 3 years ago. And then it was in September of 2023 that we actually launched deliveries for the program. And that ran through December of 2024. So it was around an 18-month pilot. Boston Delivers essentially was a pilot program that promoted a delivery service using e-cargo bikes for businesses in Boston with a focus in the Allston-Brighton neighborhoods. We decided to explore this pilot and this pilot design because years ago we had been having conversations with major carriers and industry stakeholders like Amazon, UPS, FedEx. Around the time that New York City had launched their commercial e-cargo bike pilot, and some other cities were piloting similar things. And we had conversations with these companies and basically asked, like, what would it take for you to do this in Boston and transition your fleet in Boston. And essentially they expressed that they needed to see Boston demonstrate readiness to host this, these kinds of vehicles, test out infrastructure changes. And at the time also, e-bikes hadn't been classified in our state legislation. And so there were some policy and in infrastructure barriers in their minds. And so we launched this pilot, in large part to sort of demonstrate and our readiness and explore also what it would take to really host a large scale e-cargo bike fleet for major carriers in Boston. As Mara mentioned, of course, our goals for the pilot program were also to see how this kind of delivery service at scale could reduce congestion, reduce carbon emissions, improve safety, and support local businesses. We also had a number of learning objectives as well, which I sort of indicated in talking about demonstrating readiness. So really key to the pilot design and the sort of different iterations that we took with it were these learning objectives of identifying policies, programs, and regulations that would encourage e-cargo bike delivery in Boston, test infrastructure changes, measure the benefits of e-cargo bike delivery, including its impact on environment, safety, and economic metrics, understand the costs and feasibility of e-cargo bike delivery for different business types, and also gather data and information that we can then share with delivery service providers and to help demonstrate that readiness. You can go to the next slide. So we applied and received the MassCEC grant. In total, we received about $490,000 in grant funding, which our general approach in utilizing that funding was to use it as to essentially like attract a service operator to the Boston market and cushion their startup costs. Sort of central to the pilot design, and this is different than many other e-bike pilots or programs in the region and also around the country, is that we were attracting like a full turnkey solution service operator. So we were trying to attract an operator that could provide and manage the fleet of e-bikes and related equipment, carry out the deliveries, and manage the overall logistics. And so through an RFP process, we partnered with Net Zero Logistics to do all of that. Net Zero operates one of the largest e-cargo bike fleets in New York City and that region. And they were able to utilize their expertise in that space to operate this, Boston Delivers. With Net Zero Logistics, we completed around 20,000 deliveries over the pilot period for a variety of different business types and nonprofits, largely in Allston Brighton, with an emphasis on small women and minority-owned businesses. Most of these deliveries were food related. So there was a restaurant. We worked with the Allston Brighton CSA. We worked with actually a meal catering company based in Boston. And then we also worked with City Fresh Foods, which is the meal vendor for the Meals on Wheels program. So we delivered their Meals on Wheels in Austin, Brighton. And the learnings we can, this is something I could probably talk about for an hour. There are a lot of learnings from this pilot program. One is definitely making sure that there's room for flexibility and testing out new ideas. I think that our framework of having these learning objectives really allowed us to try out different ideas without feeling like we were abandoning some core goal or tenet of the pilot. Pilot sequencing and understanding the importance of an anchor client is really important. 20,000 deliveries between September of 2023 and December of 2024. I just saw a question about the number of deliveries that we did. So pilot sequencing, so establishing an anchor client early on that can really provide the baseline volume and frequency and predictability is really important for scaling and being able to focus on smaller businesses that have lower volume and less frequent and predictable deliveries. And so, identifying who that anchor client is going to be like as early on as possible and pilot design is key. Staging requirements. There's a lot of questions on like, what does it take infrastructure real estate wise to actually stage an e-cargo bike operation? What we learned is that, if an operator is coming into a market and they're completely new, they definitely need a secure indoor location to host, to store equipment, charge batteries safely, and also provide like space for their employees to go to the bathroom, take a lunch break. And so that was something interesting we weren't prepared to actually provide. I think this can and should be supplemented with, using curb space and parking lots as sort of satellite hubs, but indoor secure locations are an important starting place. Impact of density on use cases, in addition to thinking about like what kinds of deliveries, as in like parcel size or like food versus retail, e-commerce, like it's also important to think about how dense the area of delivery is, and you want density of both where deliveries are originating and where they're ending up, because that's the environment that really makes e-cargo bikes shine as a better option. So considering density when identifying your like deployment area, understanding how much things cost is important, and of course policy alignment. Cities should absolutely consider urban freight and logistics as a key part of their overall strategies to decarbonize the transportation sector, make it more efficient, improve congestion. And these objectives around logistics and freight can also be tied in with the movement of people, just as it's tied in with the goods movement. So connection in big picture agenda and policy is important. And I think that's a great segue to the rest of the toolkit. So I'll hand it back over to Mara.
Thanks, Harper. And so as Boston was working on this pilot, a big thing to note here is that this pilot program really was a learning experience, not just for the city of Boston, but an opportunity as a region for us to learn more about how electric cargo bikes could be used for deliveries throughout our region. And so MAPC's role in this project was thinking about how can we capture some of those strategies, some of those learnings, and be able to parse them out and reflect them back to our region about how we can continue to support and expand electric cargo bike deliveries in other municipalities and in other areas within Boston as well. So what we did is put together about 4 categories of strategies and then another category related to funding opportunities to help move this forward. The toolkit that we put together is really for municipal staff, but it could also be used by advocates, by local champions, by nonprofits, by businesses, business associations. And so that was the thought process when we were putting this together. Like, what are some of those strategies, both kind of like smaller strategies and larger strategies that can be done at the municipal level to help advance some of this work in our region? So the first category of strategies that we put together were strategies that prioritize local sustainable deliveries, kind of at like a higher, broader level. And there's a number of strategies within this category that you can see on the left over here, but we just want to highlight one strategy in each of these sections for today's webinar, and then you can go to the link that's in the chat for the full toolkit to be able to read more about each one of these strategies. So the strategy highlight that we want to talk about here is providing cost subsidies for businesses to participate in deliveries. And this was a strategy that Harper just talked about that was done through the Boston Delivers program that helps reduce the cost for businesses to conduct deliveries. So a business would, for example, contract with or work with a turnkey operator to do the full delivery system, similar to how a business might work with Uber Eats or DoorDash or something like that. And that fee to work with a operator would be covered by a cost subsidy that may be provided by a municipality or a grant opportunity or something like that. And that would allow that business to provide deliveries through an e-cargo bike program at a reduced cost, maybe even a cost that might be lower than working with a different company like Uber Eats or DoorDash or Grubhub or something like that. So it really is an added incentive for local businesses to try out an e-cargo bike delivery system to move different types of deliveries, not just food, but retail and other types of deliveries that need to happen in the region. Next strategy. So our next category of strategies was around increasing access to vehicles. And this is also a subsidy-based strategy section. And there are 2 strategies within this section. One is subsidies to give to local businesses for those local businesses to purchase electric cargo bikes for deliveries. And the second one is equipment subsidies for individuals who work as local delivery employees to purchase an electric cargo bike for themselves to then do the deliveries that they need to do through their work. And one example here is in Denver, Colorado. They have a really great incentive program that allows organizations to purchase e-cargo bike deliveries, e-cargo bikes for delivery, excuse me. And the program specifically gives priority to projects that will replace an existing gas-powered vehicle with an e-cargo bike. And so that's a really important consideration when you're thinking about these incentive programs, about like what are sort of those caveats or how are we prioritizing those incentive programs to make sure that we are reaching our goals around air quality, sustainability, equity, things like that. And so this program in particular had a really good example of that. And the link to more information about that is also in our toolkit. Next category. The next category of strategies is around increasing operational efficiency and access to public space. As Harper mentioned, there's a lot of considerations for thinking about e-cargo bike deliveries, including like where they're going to park, where they're going to unload, where they're going to collect deliveries, things like that. And so there's a lot of different ways to approach some of those challenges within a program like this, or just in general with supporting e-cargo bike deliveries. One of the strategies that I wanted to highlight here was around low or no emission zones. I think this is a really exciting strategy that has been piloted quite a bit in Europe, that's being really successful in thinking about who has priority, who has access to our commercial centers. How are we making those commercial centers safer and increasing their air quality through something like a low or no emission zone? And these are designated areas that prioritize or only allow specific types of vehicles to enter based on the fuel that they use, whether it's sort of an electric vehicle, electric car, or an electric cargo bike, or some other type of device that may be a hybrid device or a fully electric vehicle. I believe the first one that was piloted in the United States was in Portland, Oregon. They received a federal grant in 2023 to pilot a small zone that was zero emission in downtown Portland. And they have been working on collecting data and trying out different types of technology to better study how it's working and understand how that curb is used differently, how safety may have changed, how air quality may have changed in that area. And I think those pilot results hopefully will come out soon, which will be a really great way for us to further understand how these zones could potentially be replicated in other areas throughout the United States. Next section. We also had this category around strategies that support public outreach and education. We know that anything that is new or different requires a lot of engagement with the community in various types of ways, including like demonstration days, training programs, partnership, working directly with business associations, going to public areas and or public events and talking to people about what even is an electric cargo bike, how is it being used, how could your business use it. And the strategy that I wanted to highlight here was around demonstration days, which really entails bringing some of these electric cargo bikes to events, to local businesses, to business association events or meetings, to learn more about the devices, how they could be used, maybe have folks try them out, hear a little bit more about how they operate, what that entails, what the costs might be for those. And those are a really important way to get hands-on learning about what they are, to kind of demystify some of the ways that they operate, and allow people to ask questions and feel a little bit more comfortable with what they are and how they could potentially be used, either in their area or for their business, something like that. And an example I wanted to highlight here was in London, in partnership with the Zero Emissions Network. They offer free 1-week electric cargo bike trials for local businesses so that they can actually determine if an electric cargo bike would work well for them. And they can try it out, see how it works. And it's a really low stress kind of way, low risk way for local businesses to try this out without fully investing either a contract with a company or purchasing electric cargo bikes for themselves, to just try it out and see how it works, if it works well for them. If not, what they might need to change in order to be more effective with electric cargo bike deliveries. So that's a great strategy. Next. And so the final category of strategies is really about funding sources. We often get asked, all these things are really great, but how do we fund them? And there are many different ways to fund not just a program, but the strategies that we've highlighted through this resource. in many ways, municipal funds can be used. There's state funds and state programs, as Elijah mentioned earlier, through MassCEC. There are federal funds, and also private foundations have, through a lot of these different programs throughout the country and internationally, provided funding for programs like this. And there are really great opportunities to test something like this out. And any number of these strategies that we've highlighted and included in this toolkit can be a great opportunity to think about what a grant or a designated funding source through any of these could be used to help highlight that. And again, I'll just mention MassCEC's Act for All program. They provided the funding for Boston Delivers and have been a really fabulous partner in helping to move this pilot program forward and develop some learnings that we are now able to share with our region around how we can equitably and sustainably expand clean transportation options in our region that also increase safety in our communities. Next slide.
Hey, thanks, Mara and Harper and Elijah. We've moved into the exciting part of our agenda. We've got about a half an hour left, which is exactly what we were hoping to discuss and ask questions. And I see a number of you have already started submitting some of those things into the Q&A. But I'll just kick us off a little bit. And I want to mention that we're also joined by Chris Morum, who is with the Net Zero Logistics, which was really the operator to make this all happen and can answer your questions that we didn't necessarily get to in this presentation. So just to kick us off, I think probably what's front and center on a lot of our minds when we think of deliveries is things like Uber Eats and DoorDash. I guess would be a good question for Harper is how was Boston Deliveries able to accommodate food delivery, and what were the key challenges to that?
Yeah, so food delivery is something that is like a very visible and like hot topic area of deliveries right now, in particular on-demand food delivery. And initially on-demand food was not going to be part of the scope of this pilot. We were focused more on sort of parcel delivery and deliveries that could be more easily like pre-scheduled and batched. Later, it was definitely proved that like that is probably the best use case for this kind of e-cargo bike delivery model. But we did want to sort of try to explore how our pilot could accommodate food delivery, in particular on-demand food delivery. So we did explore that with one of our participants, Oli Toki, which is a local food restaurant in Alston. And what we learned is that restaurants are definitely desperate for an alternative to the status quo of utilizing these apps, which oftentimes take a commission of 30% on every order if you're relying on their both being featured on their platform and having their delivery service. And so being able to lessen that cost by offering, so we tested out a service in which businesses were essentially charged. It was subsidized, but ultimately they were charged hourly for access to an on-demand delivery service. They were assigned a courier. The thinking there is that the more deliveries they do, the more they save on delivery, as opposed to the commission model, which is like the more you do, the more you spend. And I think as a model, it was something that that I think had promise, and it was very interesting. The other side of it and the ultimate challenge that we ran right into is that even though these platforms are very challenging financially for restaurants to utilize. They are also like a huge lifeline, and basically so many restaurants basically, most of their revenue is generated from orders placed on these apps. And so without being able to fully integrate and say, we as an outside delivery service, like we had to figure out a way to fulfill orders that were placed on those platforms. And that sort of, there were some like workarounds to that. If people are curious, I'm happy to like offline and talk about the sort of nitty gritty of like the, how that can be possible, but ultimately we were not able to fully integrate the delivery service in such a way that allowed us to fulfill orders that were placed on these apps, which is, like I said, most of their customers are ordering through these apps. So it's a big challenge. I think it's one that, the whole space of on-demand food delivery is one that as a city we're trying to tackle recently with the delivery ordinance, safety ordinance that we passed. I think it's something for cities to continue thinking through, and I think there's definitely a benefit. Like a burrito should not be delivered in a gas guzzling vehicle that's like, hundreds and hundreds of pounds. Like an e-cargo bike is definitely like a better use case for that. So yeah, but there are definitely technological challenges, and as it stands now, like in order to really transition the vehicle type, it needs to be done in a way that really helps businesses. Like for now, it needs to be done in coordination with these apps. We were able to do like sort of catering, pre-batched, pre-scheduled food delivery was done very successfully by Net Zero and the pilot. But yeah, that sort of like on-demand, one order at a time use case was more challenging.
Yeah, it's certainly something that consumers have come to expect also, which I imagine is a huge
Right.
challenge in the delivery of meeting that demand. So I want to ask a question to get some of the private sector perspective here, since we have Chris and Net Zero on this call here. What would you say from your perspective have been, what's the big private sector drive or opportunity in this industry that you see? Is this still evolving? Are we still in a disruptive stage, or are we sort of like this has come to scale and this is an industry that can start to be rolled out more broadly? What's your perspective on that from where you stand?
Great question, Julia. So it is still evolving, right? So I know a lot of people are asking questions about the policies that are out there. There really is no policies in the city of Boston that are coming along uh, as fast as other cities, right? So there needs to take place, and we need to understand what needs to be out there for the policies to make not only just the constituents or the residents of Boston, but all the other stakeholders involved to make sure it's a safe, operable delivery service. And there's still plenty of space to grow in this. And you're seeing a lot more retailers, food providers, healthcare providers looking at better ways to get the product to their consumers faster in a more efficient way, and really worrying about the net zero impact that it has on the climate.
Thank you. I know we have a lot of good questions coming in through the Q&A box. I just want to finish with one last one that's probably for Elijah. And that's another one that must be burning on all of our minds, which is the cost. How much does it cost? Are there any hidden costs that a municipality or planner should be aware of when considering incorporating e-cargo bikes into a delivery program?
Yeah, thanks, Julia. And I'll give a short answer, and then I'll hand it over also to Harper and Chris to talk about their experience. But I think a few of the costs that we were not expecting were, one was the staging location. We didn't realize that would be such a priority for the program. Originally, I believe we'd been thinking that, and Harper may have mentioned this, we'd have storage units and it would just be a smaller operation. But as we started getting into the program, we realized that we needed to have like a central staging location somewhere where there is safe battery charging. And I think looking ahead, we do need to build separately, like just comfort with e-bike programs. It still is something new to restaurant owners, and that might involve some sort of subsidy or some sort of other effort from, whether it's a municipality, whether it's another MassCEC program. Yeah, these are things that are on our mind. But Chris, Harper, anything else you'd mention as a maybe unforeseen cost of staging one of these programs?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is you look at the overall, I want to say barriers to entry, not just for somebody like Net Zero Logistics, but for any provider, is the cost of insurance, right? So Net Zero Logistics, we have all employees. So we have to carry our own insurance, right? We're not ICs. The bikers that we have don't ride their own bikes. They're our bikes. We have insurance. Insurance is not cheap. We're seeing that with other groups and startups in the Boston market. It is one of the biggest costs that's unforeseen when starting up. And then the other big
That's a
cost
good
that we
one.
look, the other big cost is looking at the units as well. These are not your normal, you can go to your local retailer and buy just a normal mountain bike. The bikes are very, very expensive. And they're at times are very hard to repair because a lot of the parts are made overseas. And due to the current political economic conditions, at times it can be very difficult to get parts. So the cost of, I want to say, doing business can be affected as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to add really quick to what Chris said that and Elijah. So yes, thinking about what your staging needs are is really important. Ideally, there's like public space or like underutilized city-owned buildings or property that can be utilized to stage your operation. If you're a city or organizing this, that was not like we were not able to. That's what we tried. That we were not able to do that. And so just like the cost of real estate and rent, like most large chunk of the grant funding went to paying rent for the staging location. So that's a key thing to think about. And then, yeah, in terms of like with our model where we were working with Net Zero, they have W-2 employees who, earn a living wage hourly. There's insurance. So there are all these like fixed costs. And I think that's something to understand as like the economic model here when thinking about the right use cases. So one of the reasons why it's important to pair a delivery service and model like this with a consistent, predictable kind of volume use case is because it matches the sort of fixed costs and like ongoing spending that it takes to upkeep the program, and as opposed to service that's done by independent contractors, right? So when you have these W-2 employees, insurance, you need predictability. Like you need to know exactly what predictability and consistency. Like you need to know what the deliveries, what that volume is going to be. So I just want to highlight that as an important piece.
All right, I'm going to move us into the questions from the audience since we have about 15 minutes left, and there's been quite a few entered already into the Q&A box. Several of them reflect a similar theme, so I'll ask that question, which is about infrastructure and design and street safety, both from the perspective of are there particular guidelines for making streets to accommodate e-cargo bikes? How are they allowed on off-street paths? Are they considered a vehicle? Are they more considered a bike? They fall in the gray zone, but they're also vulnerable to big trucks and vehicles. How is that being navigated in application? And what were some learnings around infrastructure and design to accommodate e-cargo bikes?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot to consider here. So I just want to say, like, for our pilot specifically, the e-cargo bikes were able to operate safely, efficiently, given our current infrastructure. The main change that we made for this pilot was outside of Net Zero staging location, we created a specific loading zone to facilitate transloading, so loading from like a van or truck onto an e-cargo bike, and a place to sort of temporarily park the e-cargo bikes. And I think access to curb space for these vehicles and prioritizing access to curb space for light electric vehicles is important, and something that we're looking at as the city. In terms of like bike lane infrastructure, our bike lanes were utilized during this pilot, and they, for the most part, were able to accommodate the kind of delivery scale routing that was happening. Something that we're seeing in, for example, New York City, where e-cargo bike deliveries has like exploded, is they're changing their bike lane standards to be wider, to accommodate wider lanes so that wider bikes can fit comfortably in them, because we're seeing e-cargo bike models come out that I think are like 48 inches as opposed to like 42. Chris, you probably can correct me on that, but basically there's sort of like, you know, we want form factors that fit our infrastructure. We want infrastructure that fits the form factors, right? Right now in Boston, you know, we haven't reached that sort of scale yet, but I think Chris makes a good point that, you know, a lot of the popular models for e-commerce, like retailers that have more capacity, are those wider form factors. And so it is important for us to think about updating our bike lane design standards to accommodate that, and also be ready to set standards, which is something that, you know, we've drafted language in our traffic rules and regulations to actually identify not just e-bikes, because right now e-cargo bikes are just essentially e-bikes, but actually define e-cargo bikes, and define the sort of dimensions and other standards that they should adhere to. So anyways, yeah, there are absolutely infrastructure changes that can be made, but I just want to highlight, like, for any cities that are like, I don't think that infrastructure necessarily should be prohibitive to you thinking about deploying an e-cargo bike pilot. That was not our biggest obstacle. It's something that should be considered, but I just want to encourage other municipalities not to see that piece as like prohibitive to getting started. Chris, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
No, I'm all right. I think you summed it up pretty well there.
If I may, I just also like to add one thought on the topic. So as we're rolling out this statewide e-bike program, and this is different than e-cargo bikes specifically, but we know that we need to expand our infrastructure, and we also know that this is going to be a culture and an education shift. So people do need to know how to ride safely, that they should be wearing helmets, those types of things, and how to plan safe routes. And so we are bringing on like a community-based organization to do this type of training for folks who are getting e-bikes and may not have used an e-bike before. Something else I'll just note is that I think a great part about this program is, you know, Chris and the Net Zero Logistics team, they're able to select the people and vet them and train them so that they were able to navigate the streets really quite safely, and know how to interact with cars and interact with other bikers who might be in these bike lanes. So I think that's one benefit of designs like this program was able to implement. And lastly, just because I saw a comment in the chat about emissions, I think a salient point, Craig, the data shows that, you know, an average e-bike will be emitting around 4 to 8 grams of CO2 per mile traveled, while your typical passenger vehicle is around 400. So we're talking like 1 to 2% of emissions, which is why we think this could be a fantastic decarbonization measure to scale across the state, because yeah, that's just an order of magnitude difference. And that 8 grams per mile is with like the dirtiest grid possible. And every year we are moving toward a much, much cleaner grid in Massachusetts. Yeah, thanks, Julia. Thanks for letting me jump in.
course, this time is four. A number of questions are regarding staffing and training for the people who are actually driving / riding these e-cargo bike delivery vehicles. There's sort of a bad stigma around some of the delivery mopeds, cutting people off in bike lanes, going on sidewalks. Some of the firsthand experiences haven't been so positive. So, what is the level of training for professional drivers for a company like Net Zero Logistics?
Yeah,
This
this is
particular
a
program.
fantastic question, and this is what kind of like separates us from the rest of, you want to say, a Getir or a Uber or whoever it might be, a gig worker, right? So our employees are all W-2 employees. When they come on board, we spent a lot of money in our training program, and when we launched, we brought our training staff up from New York to train our individuals. So the first step in every interview, we take somebody through a road course, just the normal braking, um, how they can understand the shifting of weight within a bike. All right. And then it's about 5 hours worth of training videos that we ask the individual to watch after they pass the road test. Okay. And then from that, they have anywhere from 3 to 5 days with shadowing, or you have somebody watching the biker do their job. So it takes about anywhere from, I want to say, I call it butt to seat, 10 to 15 days worth of training.
All right. Good. That's a point of distinction. I think the W-2 versus 1099 employees can make a difference in how the training is. That's interesting. I see some questions in the chat and then the Q&A box. I see one question from Dot Fennel, who we know runs Cargo B, a e-cargo bike share program around Boston and Cambridge and Somerville. And she asks in the chat if, Boston learned a lot about this from this pilot. Are there any other cities that are going to follow outside of NYC, which I just dropped an exciting news piece in the chat earlier about expanding space for e-cargo bike loading and deliveries. What are some of the other municipalities who have reached out maybe to explore something similar, who are continuing this work based on the lessons, based on what we've done here? Is there momentum that this is increasing in other parts of the state or of the nation? And Dot, if you want to add to that, we can unmute you if you have more that you want to ask.
I'm happy to take that one, and then hand it to others if you want to jump in. So part of us creating this e-cargo bike delivery resource for folks, we did a number of interviews, both with municipalities and with businesses, and things like that to try to understand what the local interest was around e-cargo bike deliveries, what concerns folks had, what were some things that they would consider or be interested in, what resources would they need. And that was a huge part of building this resource. I do know that the city of Cambridge is moving forward with a subsidy program for e-cargo bikes, which is really amazing that they're dedicating funds to that. And that some of our other municipalities have also, we've had some conversations with, and there's some interest there. But I don't know at the moment if folks are necessarily taking specific measures to move forward with those things. But we have had many conversations with different municipalities that are interested in somehow supporting e-cargo bike deliveries in the region. I think the big question is sort of how would they do that, how that works best for them, what funding opportunities do they have, what types of support do they have internally. And so I think the question is more sort of which strategies should be employed to move this forward in other municipalities. So I think the conversation is ongoing, but there's not, as far as I know, there's not an active plan necessarily at the moment besides Cambridge's active program.
Yeah, I just wanted to also add that this is absolutely an emerging space nationally. There is a C40, if you're familiar with the C40 organization, there's a working group with, I think, like over 30 or 40 cities across North America that meet monthly to discuss strategies in urban freight planning and decarbonizing their urban freight space. Cities like Seattle and Portland are exploring their, like Mara mentioned, they have a zero emission zone in Portland. Or wait, is it Portland or Seattle? One of those. And and cities like Washington, D.C. are exploring like their own micro hub program. So yes, this is something that cities are absolutely exploring. It's an emerging field. Um, and I will say in North America, or maybe I should just say in the United States, I'm less familiar with Canada and Mexico, but there is no city other than New York City who has achieved the scale of e-cargo bike commercial operations. And I think that has to do a lot with their physical environment, the density of New York City. And they've also
great
been,
help.
yeah, and they've also, of course, been very intentional about policies, carrot and stick kind of policies to incentivize like electric vehicles for commercial deliveries. But yes, it's something that the city of Boston is actually connected to a great network of peer cities, and we're all kind of working together to just learn from each other, but also ideally like whenever we do set standards, that they're universal and in line with what other cities are doing, because it makes it easier for industry.
All right, we have just a couple of minutes left, and there's one thing just like to hear briefly from a couple of you. If you're watching this and you want to know, how do I get businesses on board? How do I get something off the ground? How do we talk about this? What are some key messaging points or branding techniques, communications methods that help to build buy-in and enthusiasm for a business to try this out? What's worked?
Chris, do you want to take that, or
for a business or for a community? Could be either.
Yeah,
think
I
that
think the biggest thing is in order to make this work, the city needs and wants to have it. Not just the citizens, but the businesses, the government, they want to have this and push this forward. Second, if you look at it, geographical area, the density that needs to be there for the final mile delivery, right? So if you want to test out in an area that doesn't have a lot of density or final mile delivery, it might not be the best spot. There has to be a need um, to remove congestion in a very dense area. Why should businesses like it? There's lots of opportunities for that, right? So you can market this to your customers. Second, there's branding opportunities that you have. The bikes are not small; they can be marketed on all the time. And third, it's a great story to tell not just the stakeholders within your company, but also your consumers as well. You can go a far way.
The congestion relief piece is a point that resonates. You want to get less emissions, less crowded big trucks on your streets. Try this out.
100%. And you see a lot more when people want more on-demand services or quick pickups and deliveries, right? Because if you go into a traffic area, you're in a vehicle, you can get stuck for a long time. If it's on demand, you need a high demand
Right.
product very quickly. You can move a lot faster with
And
an
it's
e-bike.
fast. I would imagine that this can be done faster is a huge selling point.
Correct.
Great. Well, we're at time. It's 2:00, and I know there's a lot of questions that are still in the Q&A that we weren't able to answer. We will have those recorded, and we'll take a look at those amongst ourselves and see if we can effectively come up with some answers to make sure those are all addressed. If you registered for this webinar, which hopefully you all did, you will be receiving an email within the next week with all of the slides, supporting resources, and answers to your questions if possible. So with that, I'm going to wish everyone here a wonderful rest of your afternoon. And thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you all.